The crystal chandeliers sparkled like diamonds above the marble floors, casting dancing lights across the walls of the Sullivan mansion. Margaret Sullivan stood in her master bedroom, adjusting her pearl necklace in the antique mirror. Tonight had to be perfect. Absolutely perfect. This wasn't just another party. This was the charity gala she'd been planning for 6 months. And everyone who mattered in the city would be walking through her doors in less than 2 hours. She smoothed down her emerald silk gown and smiled at her reflection. The guest list read like a who's who of society. Business moguls, politicians, celebrities, and even a famous conductor were coming. This event would be talked about for months, maybe even years. Downstairs in the kitchen, Rosa Martinez moved quickly between the counters, making sure everything was in its proper place. She'd worked for the Sullivan family for 15 years, and she knew exactly how Mrs. Sullivan liked things. Not a single glass out of place. Not a single napkin folded wrong. Rosa had learned long ago that invisibility was her greatest skill in this house. Do your work, stay quiet, and never cause problems. But today, Rosa had a problem. A big one. Her sister was supposed to watch her son Daniel tonight like she did every time Rosa worked late. But an hour ago, her sister had called. She was sick with the flu and couldn't take him. Rosa had called everyone she could think of. Her neighbor wasn't home. Her friend from church had her own family emergency. Daniel's father had left years ago and was nowhere to be found. She had no one else. Rosa's hands trembled as she arranged the appetizer trays. She'd never asked Mrs. Sullivan for anything in 15 years. Not a single favor. But what choice did she have? She couldn't leave Daniel home alone, and she couldn't miss tonight. Mrs. Sullivan had made it very clear that every staff member was essential for this event. Taking a deep breath, Rosa walked upstairs to Mrs. Sullivan's bedroom and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Margaret called out. Applying her lipstick, Rosa stepped inside, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm so sorry to bother you. I have a small situation." Margaret turned, one eyebrow raised. She didn't like situations, especially not tonight. "My sister was supposed to watch my son tonight, but she's very sick. I have no one else to watch him. I was wondering if he could maybe wait in the servants' quarters during the event. Just for a few hours. He's 17. He'll be very quiet. He won't be any trouble at all. You won't even know he's here." Margaret's jaw tightened. Having the maid son in her house during the most important event of the season? What if one of her guests saw him? What would they think? But Rosa was looking at her with such desperate eyes, and finding a replacement maid at this hour was impossible. Margaret needed Rosa tonight. Everything depended on this evening going smoothly. "Fine," Margaret said coldly, "but he stays in the servants' quarters. He doesn't come out. He doesn't wander around, and if I see him anywhere near my guests, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" Rosa nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. "Yes, Mrs. Sullivan, thank you so much. I promise you won't even know he's here." An hour later, Daniel Martinez walked through the service entrance of the mansion, carrying his worn backpack over one shoulder. At 17, he was tall and thin, with kind eyes and calloused fingers from years of playing any piano he could find. His jeans were clean but faded, and his jacket had been patched at the elbow by his mother's careful hands. He'd been to this mansion once before, years ago when he was little, but he'd forgotten how huge it was. The service entrance alone was bigger than his apartment's living room. He followed his mother through hallways he wasn't supposed to see, past rooms filled with furniture that probably cost more than his mom made in a year. "I'm so sorry about this, mijo," Rosa whispered as they walked. "I know you had homework to do." "It's okay, Mom," Daniel said softly. "I brought my books. I'll just study." She led him to a small room off the kitchen, barely bigger than a closet. There was a single chair, a small table, and a tiny window that looked out onto the service alley. "Stay here," Rosa said, touching his face gently. "Don't leave this room." Mrs. Sullivan was very clear about that. "I'll bring you some food later, okay?" Daniel nodded and sat down, pulling out his textbooks. His mother kissed his forehead and hurried back to work. For a while, Daniel tried to focus on his calculus homework, but it was hard to concentrate. Through the walls, he could hear the mansion coming alive. Voices multiplied. Footsteps clicked across marble floors. Music began to play somewhere in the distance. Classical music. Beautiful classical music. Daniel closed his eyes and listened. He could identify the piece. Mozart, Piano Concerto No. 21. He knew every note. He'd watched performances of it dozens of times on YouTube, studying the pianist's fingers, memorizing the way they moved across the keys. He'd been teaching himself piano since he was 8 years old. It started when his elementary school music teacher let him stay after class to play the old upright in the corner. That teacher saw something in him, something special, and gave him permission to practice during lunch breaks. Every single day, while other kids played soccer or ate in the cafeteria, Daniel sat at that piano. By middle school, he'd taught himself to read music. By high school, he was playing pieces that college students struggled with. He learned from YouTube videos, from library books, from any source he could find. His mother had saved for months to buy him a keyboard from the thrift store. It cost $30 and half the keys stuck, but it was his treasure. Now he practiced whenever he could. At school during lunch. At home late at night with headphones so he wouldn't disturb the neighbors. On weekends, he'd sometimes sneak into churches that left their doors unlocked, sitting at their pianos for precious hours, feeling the weight of real keys under his fingers. The music from the party grew louder as more guests arrived. Daniel could hear women's laughter and men's deep voices. Glass clinked. Shoes clicked. The whole mansion seemed to pulse with life and energy. He stood up and pressed his ear against the door, trying to hear better. The music had changed. Now someone was playing Chopin. Not as well as it should be played, Daniel thought. Whoever was performing was technically correct, but missing the emotion, the soul that made Chopin beautiful. Daniel sat back down and tried to return to his homework, but the numbers swam before his eyes. All he could think about was the music, about the concert grand piano he'd glimpsed through a doorway as his mother led him through the house. A Steinway. He'd read about those pianos, dreamed about them. Never thought he'd be in the same building as one. He shook his head. Focus, Daniel. Just a few more hours and you can go home. But he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to change something. He didn't know what. He just knew that something in the air felt different, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. In the grand salon, Margaret Sullivan was laughing with her guests, champagne in hand, completely unaware that in a small room off her kitchen, a boy sat with a gift that would soon silence her entire mansion. The party was in full swing when Victoria Sullivan decided she needed a break from smiling at her mother's boring guests. At 23, she'd been to 100 events like this. The same people saying the same things, pretending to care about whatever charity her mother was supporting this month. She pushed through the kitchen door, looking for one of the catering staff to get her a specific brand of sparkling water that wasn't being served in the main room. The kitchen was busy with waiters rushing in and out, but something caught her eye. A light was on in the small storage room off to the side. That room was never used during parties. Curious, Victoria walked over and opened the door. Daniel looked up from his textbook, startled. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Who are you?" Victoria demanded, looking him up and down. She took in his worn jacket, his old backpack, his cheap sneakers. "Definitely not a guest. I'm Daniel. Rosa's son. I'm just waiting here while my mom works." "I'm not bothering anyone." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Rosa's son? The maid's kid was here. In her house? During her mother's most important event of the year. Does my mother know you're here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Yes, ma'am." She gave permission. "I'm staying in this room. I won't leave or cause any problems." Victoria crossed her arms. This was interesting. She went back into the kitchen and found her mother's assistant coordinator for the event. "Did you know the maid brought her son tonight?" Victoria asked. The coordinator looked nervous. Mrs. Sullivan approved it. "He's staying in the back room." Victoria smiled slowly. An idea was forming in her mind. A deliciously entertaining idea. She walked back to the main salon where her friends were gathered near the bar. There were 5 of them, all from families just as wealthy as the Sullivans. They'd grown up together, gone to the same private schools, summered at the same beach houses. "You'll never guess what I just found," Victoria said, her voice low and excited. Her friend Ashley leaned in. "What? The maid's son is here." "Hiding in a room off the kitchen." "You're kidding," said another friend, Brandon. "Why?" "I guess she had no one to watch him. And you know how my mother is. She probably didn't want to deal with finding a replacement maid tonight." Victoria's eyes sparkled with mischief. I'm thinking we should have some fun with this. What kind of fun? Ashley asked, already smiling. Well, we're also bored. This party is dead. What if we brought him out? Made him part of the entertainment? Brandon laughed. Your mom would never go for that. My mom's had 3 glasses of champagne and she's surrounded by her rich friends. Trust me, if I present it right, she'll think it's hilarious. Victoria's friends exchanged glances. They were all bored, and Victoria always knew how to make things interesting, even if it was usually at someone else's expense. What did you have in mind? Ashley asked. Victoria's smile grew wider. Follow me. She led her group through the party, weaving between guests until she found her mother. Margaret was standing with a circle of wealthy women, all of them laughing at some story about a vacation in the Mediterranean. Mother, Victoria said sweetly, interrupting. Can I borrow you for just a moment? Margaret excused herself and stepped aside with her daughter. What is it, dear? I'm very busy. I know, and the party is wonderful. But some of us were thinking it might be fun to play a little parlor game. You know, like the old days. Entertainment for the guests. Margaret looked interested. Parlor games had been fashionable at parties when she was young. What kind of game? Well, Victoria said carefully, I discovered that Rosa's son is here tonight, in the back room, and I thought, wouldn't it be educational for him to come out and meet people from our world, see how refined society works, maybe even participate in a little talent showcase? Margaret's eyes widened slightly. She'd had enough champagne that the idea seemed more amusing than inappropriate. A talent showcase? Just something fun and light. We could ask some of the guests to show off little skills. And we could include him too. Give the poor boy a chance to experience a real high society event. Isn't that kind of charitable? Victoria knew exactly what words to use. Charitable, educational. Her mother loved thinking of herself as generous. Margaret considered this. The champagne made everything seem funnier than it actually was, and she was feeling quite pleased with herself tonight. The party was a success. Why not add a little unexpected entertainment? I suppose it could be amusing, Margaret said slowly, but keep it brief, and make sure he understands what an honor this is. Victoria kissed her mother's cheek. Of course. Thank you, Mother. She returned to her friends triumphant. She said yes. They made their way back to the kitchen. Victoria opened the door to the storage room where Daniel was still sitting with his books. Good news, Victoria announced brightly. My mother would like you to join the party. Daniel looked up, confused. What? No, I'm supposed to stay here. Your mother said, my mother changed her mind. She thinks it would be good for you to see how a real society event works. Educational, you know? Come on. Daniel stood slowly, uncertain. Something about Victoria's smile made him uncomfortable. But if Mrs. Sullivan really wanted him to come out, he couldn't refuse. His mother's job might depend on him being polite. Okay, he said quietly, following Victoria and her friends out of the room. They led him through the kitchen, and Daniel caught his mother's eye as they passed. Rosa's face went pale with fear. She started to move toward them, but Victoria waved her off. Don't worry, Rosa, your son is fine. Mother asked to see him. Rosa stood frozen, watching helplessly as they led Daniel away. She wanted to run after them to protect her son, but she couldn't. Not without losing her job. Not without making a scene that would cost them everything. Daniel walked through the hallways, his heart pounding. The mansion looked different from this angle, bigger, more intimidating. They passed rooms full of paintings and sculptures, furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. Finally, they entered the grand salon. Daniel had never seen anything like it. The room was enormous, with ceilings that seemed to stretch up forever. The crystal chandelier was the size of a car, and there were so many people. All dressed in expensive clothes, holding fancy glasses, talking and laughing. Every single person turned to look at him. The conversations died down. People stopped mid-sentence. All eyes were suddenly on the teenager in the worn jacket and faded jeans. Daniel wanted to disappear. He wanted to run back to that small room and hide. But he was trapped in the middle of the room now, with Victoria and her friends surrounding him. Victoria raised her voice so everyone could hear. Everyone, we have a special guest tonight. This is Daniel. He's been waiting backstage, and we thought it would be fun to include him in our party. Some guests smiled politely, confused. Others whispered to each other. Margaret stood near the fireplace, watching with an amused expression. Since we're all sharing our talents tonight, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, we thought Daniel might like to contribute something too. She gestured dramatically toward the corner of the room where the concert grand piano stood. The massive Steinway gleamed under the lights, its black surface reflecting the chandelier above. We have this beautiful piano here, Victoria said. Maybe Daniel could play something for us. Daniel's eyes went to the piano. His heart skipped a beat. That beautiful, perfect instrument. Then he looked at Victoria's face and understood. This wasn't kindness. This was cruelty. She expected him to fail. She expected him to embarrass himself in front of all these people. That's why she was smiling like that. You do know what a piano is, don't you? Victoria asked loudly, and several of her friends snickered. The room filled with uncomfortable laughter. Some guests looked away, embarrassed for him. Others watched with interest, waiting to see what would happen. Daniel felt his face burning with shame. He could see his mother standing in the doorway to the kitchen now, her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. She looked terrified. Margaret stepped forward, champagne glass in hand. She was smiling, enjoying this unexpected entertainment. Go ahead, dear, she said in a condescending voice that made it clear she didn't expect anything. Give it a try. We won't judge too harshly. It's just for fun. Brandon called out, maybe you can play chopsticks? More laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel stood in the center of the room, surrounded by wealth and privilege and people who thought they were better than him. People who expected him to fail. People who brought him out here just to laugh at him, his hands clenched into fists. His breath came faster. Then something changed in his eyes. The shame began to fade, replaced by something else. Something quiet but strong. He'd spent his entire life being invisible, being overlooked, being told without words that he didn't matter because of where he came from or how much money his mother made. But they didn't know him. They didn't know what he could do. Daniel walked slowly toward the piano. The crowd parted to let him through, still whispering, still smiling. Victoria and her friends watched with barely contained glee, already imagining the story they'd tell later about the maid's son who couldn't play. Daniel reached the Steinway and stood there. For a moment, just looking at it. Up close, it was even more beautiful than he'd imagined. The keys were perfect, perfectly weighted, perfectly maintained. He sat down on the bench. The room went completely silent. Everyone was watching now, waiting, expecting disaster. Daniel placed his hands on the keys. After all those years of practice on broken keyboards and old upright pianos, his fingers finally rested on an instrument that cost more than most people's houses. He took one deep breath, and then he began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, gentle, almost careful. Daniel's fingers touched the keys like he was greeting an old friend. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 whispered into the silent room. Victoria's smile was still on her face. She expected this to last maybe 30 seconds before he gave up or made a mistake. Then everyone could laugh and move on to other entertainment. But then something happened. The music began to grow. The notes became stronger, more confident. Daniel's hands started to move faster, dancing across the keys with a grace that didn't match his worn jacket or nervous demeanor from moments before. The whispers in the room stopped. People who had been looking away, embarrassed for the boy, turned back to watch. Their expressions changed from pity to confusion to something else entirely. Wait. This wasn't what they expected. Daniel's entire body became part of the music. His shoulders swayed slightly. His fingers flew across the keys, hitting notes that seemed impossible to reach so quickly. The piano responded to his touch like it had been waiting for him, like it finally had someone who understood its voice. The melody of Rachmaninoff filled every corner of the grand salon. It bounced off the high ceilings and wrapped around the crystal chandelier. It slipped between the expensive paintings on the walls and settled into the hearts of everyone listening. This wasn't a beginner playing. This wasn't even a good amateur. This was something else entirely. Victoria's smile faded. Her mouth opened slightly as she watched Daniel's hands move. That couldn't be real. That couldn't be the same awkward boy she'd pulled from the storage room. She looked at her friends. They were all staring at the piano, their faces showing the same shock she felt. Margaret Sullivan's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. She stood frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. The maid's son, the boy she'd barely wanted in her house. He was playing one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano on her grandmother's Steinway, and he was playing it perfectly. The music built and built. Rachmaninoff's concerto wasn't just technically difficult. It required emotion. It required the pianist to pour their soul into every note. And Daniel was doing exactly that. Every struggle he'd ever faced came through in the music. Every time someone had looked through him like he was invisible. Every door that had been closed in his face. Every moment his mother had worked herself to exhaustion to give him a better life. It was all there, transformed into something beautiful. An older man near the front of the crowd moved closer to the piano. His name was Mr. Chen, and he was one of the country's most respected orchestra conductors. He'd been invited to the party because Margaret thought having him there would make her charity event seem more cultured. Mr. Chen had heard thousands of pianists in his 50-year career. He'd worked with the best musicians in the world. He could hear the difference between someone who was good and someone who was extraordinary, and what he was hearing right now made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This boy wasn't just playing the notes correctly. He understood the music, really understood it. The way he handled the dynamic changes, moving from soft to powerful and back again. The way he leaned into the emotional moments. The way his hands knew exactly where to go, like they'd played this piece 1,000 times. But that was impossible. This level of skill required years of training with the best teachers, expensive lessons, hours of practice on quality instruments. This boy was wearing a patched jacket and shoes that had been resoled multiple times. Where had he learned to play like this? Daniel was lost in the music now. He'd forgotten about the crowd, forgotten about Victoria and her cruel smile, forgotten about his mother watching from the doorway with tears streaming down her face. All that existed was the piano and the music and the feeling of finally playing on an instrument that could keep up with what he heard in his head. His fingers found every note. The difficult passages that made professional pianists nervous came to him easily. The jumping octaves, the rapid scales, the powerful chords that required strength and precision at the same time. The room was so quiet that people barely breathed. Several guests had moved closer, drawn to the piano like moths to light. A woman in a diamond necklace had tears running down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She didn't seem to notice or care. Brandon, who had suggested chopsticks just minutes ago, looked like he'd been slapped. His face was red with embarrassment. He couldn't look at his friends. Ashley had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. She'd gone to one of the best private schools in the country. She'd taken piano lessons from age 5 to 15. She'd never been able to play anything close to this difficult. And she'd had every advantage money could buy. The music reached its peak. Daniel's hands crashed down on the keys with controlled power, creating waves of sound that made the chandelier crystals tremble. Then just as suddenly, the music softened again. Became gentle, reflective. This was the part of Rachmaninoff that broke hearts. The quiet, sad melody that spoke of longing and hope and dreams that seemed too far away to touch. Daniel played it like he'd lived it. Because he had. Margaret felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She'd tried to humiliate this boy. She'd allowed her daughter to drag him out here as entertainment, as a joke. And he'd just shown her something she couldn't buy with all her money. Real talent, real dedication, real beauty. She set down her champagne glass. Suddenly, she felt very sober. The music began its final approach. The notes climbed higher and higher, building to the conclusion. Daniel's whole body was engaged now. His foot worked the pedals. His arms moved with practiced precision. Every muscle was focused on this moment. In the kitchen doorway, Rosa had stopped crying. She was watching her son with pride that threatened to burst out of her chest. She'd always known he was special. She'd heard him practice on that cheap keyboard late at night. She'd seen his dedication. But she'd never imagined this. Never imagined he could command a room full of wealthy, powerful people with nothing but his hands and a piano. The final chords rang out, powerful and clear. Daniel held them, letting the sound fill the entire mansion one last time. Then slowly, the music faded away. His hands lifted from the keys. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel sat at the piano, breathing hard. His heart was pounding. Slowly, he came back to himself. Remembered where he was. Remembered the crowd. He turned slightly, afraid to see their faces. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then Mr. Chen started clapping. His applause echoed in the quiet room. Loud, strong. The kind of applause that said this wasn't just good, this was exceptional. Then someone else joined in, and another, and another. Suddenly the entire room erupted. Everyone was clapping. Some people were cheering. Several were wiping tears from their eyes. The applause grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Daniel stood up from the piano bench, overwhelmed. He didn't know what to do with his hands, where to look. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected to play and then quietly return to the storage room. He hadn't expected this. Mr. Chen pushed through the crowd, moving toward Daniel with purpose. His face was serious, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "Young man," he said, his voice cutting through the applause. "I need to know something very important." Daniel looked at the older man, nervous. "Yes, sir?" "Where do you study? Who is your teacher?" The question hung in the air. The applause began to fade as people leaned in to hear the answer. Everyone wanted to know. This level of skill had to come from somewhere. Some prestigious music academy. Some famous instructor. Daniel's face flushed. He looked down at his worn sneakers. "I don't have a teacher, sir," he said quietly. "I taught myself." The room went silent again. "That's impossible," someone whispered. Mr. Chen stared at Daniel. "What do you mean you taught yourself? Who gives you lessons?" "No one, sir. I watch videos online. YouTube mostly, and I practice whenever I can. During lunch at school, they let me use the music room." "What do you practice on?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I have a keyboard at home. It's old. Some of the keys stick, and I use the school piano." "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 8. So 9 years." Mr. Chen looked like someone had told him the sun was actually the moon. 9 years. Teaching yourself. On a broken keyboard and a school piano. He turned to look at the Steinway, then back at Daniel. "That's not possible," he said again. But his voice wasn't doubtful. It was amazed. "Do you understand what you just played? That's one of the most difficult pieces in the entire piano repertoire. Concert pianists train for years just to attempt it." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Victoria stood against the wall, her face pale. Her plan H had backfired in the worst possible way. She'd wanted to embarrass him. Instead, she'd given him a stage. And he'd used it to show everyone exactly who was really worthless in this room. Margaret Sullivan couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of what she'd tried to do pressed down on her like a physical thing. She'd tried to humiliate a boy who had more talent in his little finger than most people had in their entire lives. Mr. Chen put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Daniel Martinez, sir." "Well, Daniel Martinez, we need to talk. Right now." The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to speak to the boy who had just changed the entire evening with 12 minutes of music. Mr. Chen kept his hand on Daniel's shoulder, guiding him away from the piano toward a quieter corner of the room. But quiet was relative. Everyone wanted to get closer. Guests pushed forward, all talking at once. That was incredible. "Where has this boy been hiding?" "I've never heard anything like it." Daniel felt dizzy. Too many faces. Too many voices. Too much attention. Just 10 minutes ago, he'd been sitting in a storage room doing calculus homework. Now he was surrounded by some of the richest, most powerful people in the city, and they were all looking at him like he'd just performed a miracle. "Give him space," Mr. Chen said firmly, holding up his hand. "Everyone, please step back." The crowd reluctantly moved back a few feet, but no one left. They all wanted to hear what would happen next. Mr. Chen turned to Daniel, his eyes serious. "Daniel, I'm the conductor of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. I also teach at the Harrison Conservatory. Do you know what that is? Daniel nodded. Of course he knew. Harrison was one of the top music schools in the entire country. Getting into Harrison was like getting into Harvard. Only the best of the best even applied. I want you to come study there, Mr. Chen said. Full scholarship. Everything paid for. Tuition, books, room, and board if you need it. You have a gift, Daniel. A real gift. And it would be a crime to let it go to waste. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. A full scholarship to Harrison? That was impossible. People like him didn't get opportunities like that. I don't know what to say. Daniel finally managed. Say yes, Mr. Chen said, smiling for the first time. I've been teaching for 30 years. I know talent when I hear it. And you have something special, something that can't be taught. But we can help you refine it. Turn you into the concert pianist you're meant to be. Before Daniel could respond, a woman in an elegant blue dress stepped forward. I'm Patricia Winters, she said. I run the Winters Foundation. We fund music education programs across the country. Daniel recognized the name. The Winters Foundation was famous. They'd funded entire music programs in schools, built concert halls, sponsored young musicians. I want to personally sponsor your education, Mrs. Winters continued. Whatever Mr. Chen's scholarship doesn't cover, we will. And I want to provide you with a professional piano, a real one. You shouldn't have to practice on broken keyboards anymore. Daniel felt tears building behind his eyes. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. A man in an expensive suit pushed forward. Robert Hammond, he introduced himself. I own Hammond Music Academy downtown. I want to offer you private lessons with our best instructors, free of charge, and studio time to practice whenever you want. I'll cover his living expenses, another guest called out. Whatever he needs. Food, transportation, anything. I want to commission a performance, someone else shouted. A private concert for my company's annual gala. I'll pay whatever his rate is. The offers came faster and faster. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone wanted to be part of Daniel's story. The boy genius who taught himself piano. The hidden prodigy discovered at a society party. Several people had their phones out, Daniel noticed. They'd been recording his performance. Even now, some were still filming, capturing this moment. Rosa finally pushed through the crowd. She'd been frozen in the doorway, unable to move. But now she needed to get to her son. She needed to make sure he was okay. Mijo, she said, reaching for him. Her voice was thick with tears. Daniel turned and grabbed his mother, hugging her tight. Mom, he whispered. What's happening? Something wonderful, Rosa said, crying and laughing at the same time. Something so wonderful. Mr. Chen smiled at Rosa. You should be very proud, Mrs. Martinez. Your son is extraordinarily talented. I know, Rosa said, touching Daniel's face. I've always known. On the other side of the room, Margaret Sullivan stood like a statue. People were glancing at her, whispering. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew that she and her daughter had tried to humiliate this boy. And everyone had seen how spectacularly that plan had failed. Victoria had disappeared. She'd slipped out of the room as soon as the applause started, unable to face the shame. Her friends had scattered too, suddenly very interested in the appetizer table or the bar, or anywhere that wasn't near the piano. Ashley couldn't believe what had just happened. She'd gone along with Victoria's plan because it seemed funny at the time, a little harmless fun, but watching Daniel play, seeing the tears in people's eyes, hearing those offers of help pouring in, she felt sick to her stomach. They'd been so cruel. So casually cruel. Brandon had already left the party entirely. He'd walked out without saying goodbye to anyone, his face burning with embarrassment. He kept hearing his own voice in his head. Maybe you can play chopsticks? God, what an idiot he'd been. Margaret finally forced herself to move. She walked slowly toward Daniel and Rosa. The crowd parted for her. People watched to see what she would do. She stopped a few feet away. Daniel looked at her and she couldn't meet his eyes. Margaret started, then stopped. What could she possibly say? Sorry, didn't cover it. Nothing covered it. Mrs. Sullivan, Rosa said quietly. We should go. I know you're busy with your party. No, Margaret said quickly. Please, I need to. She took a breath. Daniel, what I did tonight was unforgivable. I tried to humiliate you. I allowed my daughter to use you as entertainment. And you responded by giving everyone here something beautiful, something none of us deserved. Daniel didn't know how to respond. He just nodded slightly. I want to make this right, Margaret continued. The Winters Foundation isn't the only one that can donate pianos. I'll arrange for a concert grant to be delivered to wherever you're living. And I'll make a donation to Harrison Conservatory in your name. A significant donation. You don't have to do that, Daniel said quietly. Yes, I do, Margaret said firmly. I absolutely do. She paused. Rosa, I hope you'll consider continuing to work here. But I'll understand if you'd rather not. After tonight, I wouldn't blame you. Rosa looked at her son, then back at Margaret. I'll think about it, she said carefully. Mr. Chen gently interrupted. Daniel, I don't want to overwhelm you, but I need your contact information. We have a lot to discuss. Placement tests, class schedules, housing arrangements if you need it. He lives with me, Rosa said, in an apartment about 30 minutes from here. That's fine, Mr. Chen assured her. We can work with that. Daniel, can you come to the conservatory on Monday? Say 2 o'clock? Daniel looked at his mother. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Yes, sir, Daniel said. I'll be there. Excellent, Mr. Chen pulled out his phone. Let me get your number. As they exchanged information, more guests approached. Business cards appeared from everywhere. Everyone wanted Daniel to have their contact information. Call me, email me. Let's talk about opportunities. A younger woman who worked in music management approached Rosa directly. Mrs. Martinez, I know this is overwhelming, but your son is going to need representation. Someone to help him navigate all these offers and opportunities. Here's my card. Think about it. Rosa took the card with shaking hands. Her mind was spinning. 2 hours ago, she'd been worried about her son sitting in a storage room doing homework. Now people were talking about management and concert performances and scholarships to schools she'd only dreamed about. Mrs. Winters returned with a folder full of papers. I had my assistant print out the foundation's sponsorship agreement. It's standard. Just look it over when you have time. No pressure. But I want you to know we're serious about helping. Thank you, Rosa managed to say. Thank you so much. Daniel felt like he was in a dream. A strange, overwhelming, wonderful dream. People kept talking to him, but he could barely process the words. Scholarship, concert hall, professional piano, recording studio, performance opportunities. Mr. Chen noticed Daniel's dazed expression and smiled sympathetically. It's a lot, isn't it? Yes, sir, Daniel admitted. You'll get used to it. This is your life now, Daniel. Everything just changed. He squeezed Daniel's shoulder. Get some rest tonight. Process all of this. Then come see me Monday and we'll start planning your future. Across the room, people were still watching videos of Daniel's performance on their phones. Some were already posting them online. The footage was shaky and the sound wasn't perfect, but you could see Daniel at the piano. You could hear enough of the music to know it was special. One guest, a social media influencer with millions of followers, had live-streamed part of the performance. Her followers were already commenting, asking questions, sharing the video. Within an hour, the video would have thousands of views. By morning, it would have millions, and Daniel Martinez, the 17-year-old boy who taught himself piano on a broken keyboard, would wake up famous, but right now, in this moment, he was just holding his mother's hand while strangers offered him a future he'd never dared to imagine. Victoria watched from the staircase landing, hidden in the shadows. She saw everything. Saw her mother apologizing. Saw the crowd surrounding Daniel like he was a celebrity. Saw her friends avoiding eye contact with everyone. She'd wanted to make him feel small. Instead, she'd made him a star, and the worst part? She'd have to live with what she'd done for the rest of her life. Everyone at this party would remember. Everyone would talk about it. The girl who tried to humiliate a genius and got humiliated instead. She turned and walked upstairs to her room, closing the door behind her. Downstairs, she could still hear the voices. Still hear people congratulating Daniel. Still hear her mother trying to apologize. Victoria sat on her bed and put her face in her hands. What had she done? Daniel woke up the next morning to his phone buzzing nonstop. Text messages. Missed calls. Notifications flooding in so fast his phone could barely keep up. He grabbed the phone, confused. Then he saw it. The video of his performance had gone viral. Not just a few thousand views, millions. The live stream that one guest had posted, the shaky phone recordings that others had uploaded, they'd spread across every social media platform. People were sharing it, commenting on it, talking about it. Self-taught piano prodigy discovered at high society. Party. Maid's son stuns wealthy. Crowd with incredible performance and teen. Genius proves talent has nothing to do with money. The headlines were everywhere. News sites had picked up the story. Music blogs were analyzing his technique. People from around the world were commenting. This brought me to tears. I've been playing piano for 20 years and I can't do this. On the way those rich people tried to humiliate him and he just destroyed them with talent. Rosa came into his room, her own phone in her hand. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. Mijo, have you seen this? I'm looking at it now, Daniel said, scrolling through comments. Mom, this is crazy. On the news stations called. They want to interview you. All of them. Channel 4, Channel 7, the national networks, everyone. Daniel sat up in bed, his mind racing. Yesterday morning, he'd been a normal high school student. Now the whole world was watching. His phone rang. It was Mr. Chen. Daniel, I hope I'm not calling too early, the conductor said. Have you seen the videos? Yes, sir. I just woke up to all of this. Good. I want to talk to you about managing this attention. It's going to be intense for a while, but it's also an opportunity. People want to hear your story. They want to see you succeed. We need to be smart about how we handle this. Over the next few days, Daniel's life turned completely upside down. The interview requests never stopped. Major news programs wanted him. Talk shows called. A famous late-night host personally reached out, asking Daniel to come play on his show. Mr. Chen helped Daniel and Rosa navigate it all. They chose carefully which interviews to accept. They made sure Daniel's story was told right. Not as a sob story, but as a testament to what dedication and talent could achieve, even without money or privilege. On Monday, Daniel went to Harrison Conservatory for the first time. Walking through those doors felt surreal. Students stopped and stared. They'd all seen the videos. Some came up to congratulate him. Others just watched from a distance, whispering. Mr. Chen gave him a tour of the campus. Practice rooms with perfect acoustics. Concert halls with stages Daniel had only dreamed of playing on. And pianos. So many beautiful pianos. This is your practice room, Mr. Chen said, opening a door to a small studio. Inside was a Steinway grand piano, not as large as the one at Margaret's mansion, but just as perfect. Daniel walked over to it slowly. He sat down and played a few notes. The sound was pure, clean, responsive. It's yours, Mr. Chen said, whenever you need it, day or night. This room is reserved for you. Daniel couldn't speak. He just nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The scholarship paperwork was processed quickly. Mrs. Winters from the foundation was true to her word. A piano was delivered to Daniel and Rosa's small apartment the following week. The delivery men had to take the door off its hinges to get it inside, and it took up half their living room, but neither of them cared. Daniel practiced every day. Real practice now with proper instruction. Mr. Chen assigned him to study with Professor Catherine Walsh, one of the best piano teachers in the country. She was demanding and didn't care about his viral fame. She cared about making him better. You have raw talent, she told him during their first lesson. Extraordinary raw talent. But we need to refine your technique. Fix some bad habits you picked up teaching yourself. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked before. And Daniel did. He practiced 6, 7, 8 hours a day. His fingers developed calluses on top of calluses. His back ached from sitting at the piano, but he loved every minute of it. 3 months after that night at the mansion, Daniel gave his first official concert. A small recital at Harrison Conservatory, but the auditorium was packed. News crews came. The videos from that performance went viral too, though not as viral as the original. This time, people expected him to be good. 6 months later, he performed with Mr. Chen's orchestra, a full concert hall, professional musicians backing him up. His mother sat in the front row, wearing a new dress that Mrs. Winters had insisted on buying her. When Daniel walked onto that stage, the applause was deafening. And when he played, he poured everything into the music. All the years of struggle, all the nights practicing on that cheap keyboard, all the times people had looked through him like he didn't exist. But also the joy, the hope, the knowledge that sometimes, if you work hard enough and believe in yourself enough, impossible things can happen. The performance was flawless. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Backstage, Mr. Chen hugged him. "You're ready," he said. Ready for bigger stages. Ready for the world. And the world was ready for Daniel. Over the next year, invitations poured in. Concert halls across the country wanted him. Then international venues started calling. Paris, London, Tokyo, Sydney. Daniel was careful with his fame. He remembered where he came from. He remembered his mother working long hours so he could have opportunities. He remembered all the kids like him who had talent but no access to good instruments or teachers. He started speaking at schools in low-income neighborhoods. He worked with Mrs. Winters's foundation to fund music programs. He gave free concerts at community centers. And every single time he spoke to students, he told them the same thing. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something because of where you come from or how much money your family has. Talent doesn't care about your address. Dreams don't check your bank account. If you want something badly enough, if you're willing to work for it, you can make it happen. The videos of those speeches went viral too. Daniel became more than just a talented pianist. He became a symbol of hope for kids who thought success was only for other people. Meanwhile, back at the Sullivan mansion, things had changed. Margaret had kept her word. She donated a substantial amount to Harrison Conservatory. She funded 3 new music programs in public schools. She volunteered with the Winters Foundation, helping to identify talented students who needed support. But she couldn't undo what she'd done. She couldn't take back that night. The video of her condescending voice saying "we won't judge too harshly" played on repeat across the internet, usually right before the footage of Daniel's amazing performance. She'd become a cautionary tale, a meme, a reminder of how privilege and cruelty could backfire. Rosa had quit working for the Sullivan family. With Daniel's growing income from concerts and sponsorships, she didn't need to clean houses anymore. She went back to school herself, studying to become a social worker. She wanted to help other families like hers. Victoria had transferred to a college across the country. She couldn't handle staying in a city where everyone knew what she'd done. The video followed her everywhere. Future employers would see it. Future friends would find it. It would be part of her story forever. She'd sent Daniel a letter 6 months after that night. A real apology, handwritten 3 pages long. She took full responsibility. She didn't make excuses. She said she understood if he never forgave her, but she wanted him to know she was truly sorry, and she was working on becoming a better person. Daniel never responded to the letter, but he didn't throw it away either. He kept it in a drawer, a reminder that people were complicated, that everyone deserved a chance to grow and change, even if forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. 2 years after that fateful night, Daniel performed at Carnegie Hall, 20 years old and playing on one of the most prestigious stages in the world. The concert sold out in hours. Critics called his performance transcendent and once in a generation. Rosa sat in the audience wearing another new dress, watching her son live his dream. She thought about all the years of struggle, all the double shifts she'd worked, all the sacrifices, and she knew it had all been worth it. After the performance, during the standing ovation, Daniel looked out at the audience. Thousands of people cheering for the boy who'd taught himself piano on a broken keyboard. The maid's son who'd been brought out to be humiliated and instead changed his entire life in 12 minutes. He thought about that night often. How close he'd come to refusing, to staying in that storage room, to never sitting at that piano. One different choice and none of this would have happened. But he'd made the choice to play, the choice to show them who he really was. And that choice had opened every door. Now he had a responsibility to hold those doors open for others. After Carnegie Hall, Daniel started his own foundation, the Martinez Music Initiative. It provided instruments, lessons, and mentorship to talented young musicians who couldn't afford them. Every kid who showed dedication got support, regardless of their background. The foundation's motto was simple: talent doesn't need money, it needs opportunity. Daniel performed around the world, but he never forgot where he came from. He never let fame change who he was at his core. A kid who loved music, who found joy in every note, who believed that beauty could come from anywhere, even a small apartment with a broken keyboard. And every time he sat at a piano, no matter where in the world he was, he remembered that night. The moment everything changed. The moment he proved that talent, dedication, and courage could silence any room. No matter how many people doubted you, the mansion had tried to shame him. Instead, his piano skills had given him wings.